Yesterday I was at my locals and we had a small tournament. I did end up winning. I went 3-0. It was very cool. I was using single strike and no one's surprised. But while we were playing and in between matches and all and before whatever, we were talking about what decks are doing really well and why and their matchup spreads. And I said, you know what? Why don't we take a look at Trainer Hill data? We'll make a video, and I think it could be interesting and really informative to understand how often decks are winning against other popular decks in the format. So let's hop over to Trainer Hill. Oh, but before we do, I should say that the decks that we're looking at are based on the top 10 decks in the format from both Justin Basil, Celio's Network, and myself. So I'm not just using my own information, I'm using and compiling information from other content creators as well, because I value their opinions, and I also think that having more information is better. But that's, all the links to Celio and Trainer Hill, Justin Basil, all in the video description. And if you want to help this channel grow, and we're going to be doing a nice first edition giveaway when we hit 1,000 subscribers, then you can go ahead and leave a like, follow, comment, all that kind of stuff. And sharing this video really tells YouTube that this is a good video and other people should watch it. Now we can go over to Trainer Hill. So here we are at Trainer Hill. Again, link to this is in the video description. The first thing we gotta mention is the number of games played. We set a minimum of 5 games. I couldn't go any higher because if you do, you start getting blank spots in the data, and I really don't want that for presentation. But if you want to look at a couple of decks, then it is better to increase the sample size and increase the minimum games played. But we have a ton of decks here, so it's not surprising that the number of games played is going to be a little lower. The next thing we're going to talk about is that the decks that you see in the rows on the left here with the asterisk, those are the win rate that you see in this box is for the deck with the asterisk. So just for example, we're starting with Calyrex and Teleon. This is Ice Rider Calyrex. The reason we're not starting with the best or the worst decks in the format is because Trainer Hill automatically formats this in alphabetical order. So from A to Z, going from top to bottom, there's nothing I can do about that. And so we're going to start in alphabetical order. Calyrex here, Ice Rider Calyrex, wins against Gengar 66 or 67% of the time with 6 matches played. And if I remember correctly, Trainer Hill pulls data from Limitless. I don't know if it pulls it from anywhere else, but I know it pulls it from Limitless. Calyrex is going to beat a fair amount of decks, and when we're creating top 10 lists, this is something that's important to know. What decks a particular archetype is doing well against, and what are they struggling with? And generally, the decks that are at the bottom or the lower in the top 10 list, or maybe not even on the top 10 list, are the ones that are going to struggle against the 3 most popular decks in the game, which at the moment are Mew Genesect or Mew VMAX, Suicune Ludicolo, and Single Strike Urshifu. Those are the 3 most common decks, and you have to do well against at least one of them, and ideally be neutral on another. If you're going to lose, you lose the Mew matchup, a lot of decks do, that's fine. It's not a death sentence. As long as you can win against another one of those 3 decks and then be somewhat neutral against the third. Now, this is going to be a little challenging for some, and you're going to see that, and then you go and look at a top 10 list and you're like, oh yeah, now it starts to make a little sense why this is a little on the bottom. But anyway, let's start looking at some data. So we already said that Ice Rider is going to beat Gengar 2 out of 3 times, and it loses, oddly enough, to double Inteleon. This is the Rapid Strike Inteleon. It loses pretty hard. It's going to lose to Jolteon as well, a lot. I mean, it's going to lose 3 out of 4 games against Jolteon, and Jolteon just is very quick. It's very aggressive in its snipe damage, so I'm not really surprised. It's neutral with Leafeon. I'm considering anything between like 45, 46 to 55 is pretty neutral. It's statistically is going to lose to Leafeon, but 48%, I would have to do a little bit of math, but I seriously doubt that we are talking about statistically significant data. We also have... Okay, well, you know what, Siri? I don't know what to tell you. That was... I didn't... Okay, whatever. Mew Genesect. Calyrex does have a disadvantage against Mew Genesect. It's very split with Suicune, and it beats Single Strike Urshifu, 2 out of 3 times. So it loses to Mew, it's neutral against Suicune, and it beats Urshifu. And that's exactly what we just talked about, which is why Ice Rider is doing pretty well. It's against the 3 most popular decks, it loses, it wins, and the last one's neutral. That's solid. It does lose to Rapid Strike Urshifu and Zacian. The Zacian matchup I'm not really surprised at, because Zacian is hitting Calyrex for weakness, and it's also taking those up trades. So not really surprised there. The Rapid Strike Urshifu, it's going to lose to Rapid Strike for the same reasons it does Jolteon. Just that spread damage is hard for Calyrex to deal with. Moving on to Gengar. Gengar, we already talked about, it loses, right? That's something else. Calyrex is going to beat Gengar, which means Gengar is going to lose to Calyrex. It's just the inverse. If you add up these numbers, they equal 100%. So, some of this is going to be repetitive to a degree, but, we got to do it anyway. Gengar is going to lose to Calyrex. It is, I'm skipping over the matchups where it goes over itself. All of these 50% in this diagonal are the decks against itself, which are 50-50 matchups. So, Gengar Umbreon is losing to Calyrex, it's losing to Inteleon, it's split with Jolteon, it's fairly neutral with Leafeon, has an advantage against Mew, that's strictly because of weakness. It loses to Suicune, it loses to Urshifu, it's pretty split with Rapid Strike, and it loses to Zacian. Now, a couple of these things did surprise me. I thought the win rate for Gengar Umbreon and 61 matches played is a really nice sample size, so you can be really confident in this 60% win rate, and I'm a little surprised that it's not higher, because you're hitting the main attacker for weakness consistently. But this is not a knock against Gengar, it's actually showing us how good Mew is, and how Gengar is a pretty slow deck. You can be hitting for turn 2 Fear and Panic, and that's probably where those wins are coming in. But man, Mew VMAX is just super, super quick, and it's hard to keep down. So this 60% is not a fault of Gengar's, it's just Mew is ridiculous. The other thing that surprised me was the Rapid Strike Urshifu matchup. I expected this to be a little bit more in favor of Rapid Strike Urshifu, considering you're hitting Gengar for weakness, but Gengar often does have something like Umbreon or some other secondary attacker that they can use. Some Gengar lists do include things like Single Strike Urshifu, so that they can handle things like Jolteon, take other knockouts pretty easily. We don't know, is this Mew Genesect running, Latias? Is it running Meloetta? Is this Gengar running Single Strike Urshifu? Is it running, is it the Turbo version? We don't really know. It doesn't break it down. This is by archetype, so there obviously are going to be versions that perform a little bit differently compared to other versions of itself, but, we can't look at every single detail like that. It would take forever. Rapid Strike Inteleon with Inteleon has some pretty good matchups, but take a look at this. It beats Calyrex fine, it beats Gengar fine, it's neutral to itself. It loses 100% of the time to Jolteon. 12 matches played and has not won a single time. That is unreal. I would have not guessed. Eventually you gotta win one, right? So that's crazy to me. Beats Leafeon, but here's the problem. It loses to Mew, it loses to Suicune, it loses to Urshifu, it's neutral with the other Urshifu, and it loses to Zacian. It has some really good matchups in Calyrex, Gengar, Leafeon. Those are really good decks, but again, it loses to all 3 of the 3 most popular decks in the format, and that you just can't have, which is why you see Rapid Strike Inteleon kind of being that 7, 8, 9, maybe even 10 spot in a few different tier lists. That's one of the reasons. You can't lose to all three most popular decks. You just can't. Jolteon, again, beats Calyrex. It's split with Gengar, which is very fascinating to me. It kind of tells me that if Jolteon can't deal with the Houndooms fast enough, Gengar is going to come in and crush the Jolteon in the active. It has a 100% win rate against Inteleon. It's going to beat Leafeon most of the time. It's split with Mew. It loses to Urshifu, but it wins against Umbreon. My goodness. It's split against Mew. It loses to Suicune. No, wait. I'm getting ahead of myself. Even with Mew, beats Suicune decisively, loses hard to Urshifu, and then it loses to Rapid Strike Urshifu, and it beats Zacian. Now, this is a classic case of wins really hard against one, loses really hard against the other, and neutral against Mew. Again, that's fine. Jolteon's a pretty, I wouldn't even say mid-tier. I would say it's on probably right outside of the top three in that number 3 and that number 4, maybe number 5 spots. So I guess, 5 is mid, but yeah, Jolteon pretty good. It has some really good matchups. Leafeon doesn't have as many good matchups as you might think, considering its general spots in top 10, but this is again why it falls in that 5, 6, 7 sometimes spot. Even with Calyrex, it loses to Gengar, it loses to Inteleon, it loses to Jolteon, it loses to Mew, it beats Suicune, and it beats Urshifu pretty good. Loses to Rapid Strike Urshifu, loses to Zacian. So the things that's keeping Leafeon really in the top 10 is that it beats Suicune Ludicolo and it beats Single Strike Urshifu. The rest of the time, it's pretty even or losing, and I find that just fascinating. The fact that these two very popular, very good meta decks performing well against 2 of the 3 of them can kind of keep you in that top 10, and I think it just goes to show that there's enough variety in this format where if, even if you're doing, split matchups against several decks and even losing against a couple, the popularity of tier 1 decks alone and success against them can keep an archetype alive. This is where things get interesting. So we are comparing each of these decks on the left to 9 other decks. Remember, the 10th deck is itself, and it has a 50% win rate. So compared to the 9 other decks, Mew has a win rate of above 50% against 6 of them, which is crazy, but one other deck actually does that too. One other deck has a win rate of above 50% against 6 decks, and if you haven't already figured it out, I'm sorry, the fire trucks, New York City, what are you gonna do? One other deck shares that title of most or highest number of decks with the above 50% win rate. Mew is beating everything except for Gengar, it's beating everything except for Jolteon, and it's beating everything again except for Umbreon Urshifu. Now, look at these losses. 40%, 47%, 45%. That's really not... 45% for Urshifu Umbreon is really not as much as you would expect. 47%, that's practically split, right? I mean, 47 compared to 50 over 36 games played, you're losing about half the time if you're a Jolteon. So even the decks that it loses to, it doesn't really lose very decisively. The worst matchup you can have with Mew is Gengar, and even that you're winning almost 4 out of 10 times. So Mew is just ridiculous. It's very, very good. It wins really good, really hard against Rapid Strike Urshifu is its best matchup. It wins against Zacian pretty decisively. It wins against Rapid Strike Inteleon pretty decisively. Leafeon it beats decisively. I mean, I would say anything that's like 70% or more is a decisive win. Yeah, man. Mew is just crazy, crazy good. One of the reasons that Single Strike Urshifu doesn't have a better matchup against it is because, one, there's a chance that you're going to start your Houndours or your Urshifu, and if you do, you're in a lot of trouble. And also, sometimes Urshifu just bricks or has troubles with inconsistency where, you just can't get the Houndooms or the energies you need to start attacking. Fusion Strike energy, if you attach it to a Mew that's on the bench, you are safe from Umbreon's ability, so you don't have to worry about an Umbreon coming into play and pulling that Mew into the active spot, and that's, oh man, I just lost my attacker, now I have nothing to do next turn, and I just lost 2-3 prizes in the process. Fusion Strike energy prevents that. And you're just so fast. Even with Gengar, again, if Gengar has a slow start, you have a very good chance to win. So, Mew, crazy good. Suicune Ludicolo splits with Calyrex. It's going to beat Gengar decisively. It's fairly in favor against Inteleon and Teleon. It loses very hard to Jolteon. Again, that's not surprising because of weakness. It loses to Leafeon. It loses to Mew. It's split against Suicune, and it beats Umbreon Urshifu a lot. And then Urshifu, Rapid Strike, and Inteleon, it's split. So again, loses to Mew, neutral against Suicune, which is itself, but it beats Urshifu, Single Strike Urshifu. So lose one, win one, you're probably fine, and you have some other good matchups as well. Now, what surprised me was that Suicune and Urshifu, Single Strike, or Umbreon, I'm just going to call it Umbreon. Suicune and Umbreon don't have as many favorable matchups as you might expect, considering how high they are placed on pretty much every tier list. I mean, Umbreon, it loses to Calyrex, it loses to Leafeon, it loses to Suicune, and then the rest of it, it's pretty neutral, right? I mean, it beats Gengar 60%, it beats Inteleon, it crushes Jolteon, it's split with Mew for the most part, 55%, it's split with Rapid Strike, and it's fairly split with Zacian. So, half of these decks you are 50-50 win rate. It's just really, you're doing a little bit better than Mew, which Mew is very, very popular, so that helps a ton, and you're really beating Jolteon, and people who play Jolteon either A, just like Jolteon, or B, are trying to capitalize on one of the top 3 decks' weaknesses, knowing that the other deck that's very popular is strong against you. Rapid Strike Urshifu beats Calyrex. It is pretty split with Gengar, which is, again, weird, considering that Gengar has a weakness to fighting, but remember, they're probably just going to use their Umbreons to deal with your Urshifus. You lose to Rapid Strike and Teleon. You do beat Jolteon because of weakness. You do beat Leafeon because of nice spread damage. You lose very hard to Mew. You're split with Suicune and Single Strike, and then you lose to Zacian. Now, losing to Zacian is not really that big of a deal because it's not a very popular deck in the format. Most people who are getting back into the game or have played previously, took a break, might pick up Zacian Zamazenta because they likely have the cards and it's very, very cheap to build. However, once you start kind of accumulating cards from the current sets, you're probably going to leave Zacian Zamazenta behind in favor for something else. So, not extremely popular Zacian Zamazenta, so losing to it's not really that big of a deal, right? You really care about the top 3, Mew, Suicune, and Single Strike. And you lose hard to Mew, but you're neutral with the other 2, which is fine. And then lastly, Zacian has some pretty favorable matchups with Calyrex, Gengar, and Teleon, slightly in favor of Leafeon. It's split with Suicune, and then also you do beat Single Strike pretty decisively. The only thing that you really lose against is Jolteon and Mew. Those are the 2 worst matchups. They're not terrible decks to lose against. I think I said you beat Single Strike, but you do lose to Single Strike. So another thing that keeps Zacian kind of down out of popularity. You're not winning against any of the top 3. You lose pretty much most of the time to Mew. You're losing often to Single Strike, and then you are split with Suicune. So you don't really have any great matchups. I mean, your best matchup is Inteleon and Teleon, and even that is not a very common deck. rappers like Urshifu has kind of fallen a bit by the wayside. People are coming back to it, especially with the Moltres variant. You do see popping up, but I mean, really, Calyrex you do well against. That's only because of weakness. And Gengar, which again, popular deck, but not as popular. So now that we've kind of gone through these matchups, I hope you can start to understand what deck you should be playing going forward in a competitive format. You really want to be trying to pick a deck that either does okay, split against most of the decks in the format, most of the popular top 10 decks in the format, or has good matchups against the top 3. Because realistically, when you go to a competitive event, you're going to a 1K, a regional, international, or intercontinental championships, or whatever they're called, whatever the ICs are called, people are going to be playing what they feel is either the best decks in the format, the top probably 3 decks in the format, the ones they are most familiar with, the one they like the most, the one they feel is the best, or they're going to be playing the decks that perform the best against those, knowing that people are going to play the top 3. So if you have a deck that does really well against the top 3 decks, but poorly against the others, you might have a good chance because, well, the most commonly played decks are going to be the best decks in the game. So something like Leafeon, it doesn't have the best matchups overall, but against Mew, Suicune, and Urshifu, you do pretty well. So it's not a bad choice competitively. That's just one way of looking at it. I hope that this was not too much numbers and everything. I haven't really seen anybody do a video like this, at least not in a while, and not that I'm like actively searching really hard for it, so maybe someone did it recently, I don't know, but I think these videos once in a while kind of informative in conjunction with things like tier lists, and you can easily find, like I said, Justin Basil and Celio Network's tier lists in the video description, so check them out and then look at these matchup spreads and see how well do their overall matchups and the matchups against Mew, Suicune, and Single Strike. If they have poor matchups against those decks, where do they fall on the tier list? I wouldn't be surprised if there's a very strong correlation between performing poorly against the top 3 and then having a lower place in the top 10. But like I said, feel free to let me know what you think in the comments. I could be wrong. Maybe there's something I missed or I'm not really accounting for. I want to know about it because it helps me grow. It's not just to get video engagement, right? It helps me and other people who are watching this video learn. Right? No one's perfect. No one's going to be right 100% of the time. So if you think of something that I missed or I didn't consider, definitely tell me. That is going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, found it a little informative. If you did, subscribe, like, comment, all of that fun stuff. And pretty much, I think that's it, right? 1,000 subscribers. We got a cool giveaway. And so that's it. I'll see you next time.